Released on September 29th, 1977, Billy Joel's The Stranger was his breakthrough release, the key to his whole career. I'm going to discuss its impact on rock and roll and on his career, and the greater thematic unity of it, its history, and its importance in the grand scheme of music. So, The Stranger was Billy Joel's fifth release, released on September 29th, 1977 by Columbia Records. And the most important thing perhaps about it wasn't its big hits or the fact that it's the reason Billy Joel kept his career going. It was mainly the fact that it started his working relationship with Phil Ramone. Outstanding producer, engineer, worked with, you name it, classic artists of all shapes and sizes, from Frank Sinatra to Paul Simon. And he ended up being the key to Billy Joel's career, working with him for the next decade up until Joel's 1986 album, The Bridge. Now, the reason why I think this is so important is because if you listen to Joel's first four albums, what you'll hear is a very different sound. Production plays a much larger part than people often realize. And if you listen to The Stranger, the number one thing it does, and the reason why the production is so important, is it captures the sound of New York City. Obviously, Billy Joel is a New Yorker, particularly he comes from the old Jewish New York with immigrant parents, so he's first generation on this side. This is a huge part of his identity and what you hear in the sounds on his records. Piano Man was a massive hit, of course, and it was unexpectedly massive. But everything since then, he had been making good music, he had been writing great songs, but his career was stagnating from a commercial standpoint. So going from Piano Man to Street Life Serenade to Turnstiles, underrated albums in their own right, Joel was stuck. He was stymied, and he had written some great songs, like I said, from New York State of Mind to Summer Highland Falls. You know, these are classic songs. The Entertainer. However, he was stymied. He did not have any big hits, and he wanted that big record. Well, The Stranger delivered, and then some. The Stranger delivered two of his most long-lasting songs, Just the Way You Are, which peaked at number one on the Billboard Hot 100, and She's Always a Woman. Now, my two favorites of the singles are the other two, Moving Out, Anthony's song, and Only the Good Die Young. However, it's the deep album cuts that make The Stranger, The Stranger. Like the previous album I reviewed, Paul Simon's Graceland, The Stranger was absolutely a steadfast, regular rotation album in my household growing up. My father, giant Billy Joel fan, and he played The Stranger a lot. And he told me from a very young age that Scenes from an Italian Restaurant was one of the greatest songs ever recorded, and it was his personal favorite Billy Joel song. And guess what? It's also Billy Joel's personal favorite Billy Joel song. It is an encapsulation of everything that Joel loved about rock music and about his native New York, just filtered down, funneled into one masterpiece of 7.5 minutes, covering the span of what does sound like Italian music with clarinets and with the Italian sound, the accordion, to regular rock and roll, the Brenda and Eddie, or Brenda and Eddie if you're going by his New York pronunciation. That section is very much just straight ahead rock and roll that he grew up on. But it's all put together in a suite that, of course, is inspired by Sir Paul McCartney, especially side 2 of Abbey Road. Joel has gone on record many times as a self-declared giant Beatles fan, and that was his primary impact and influence on what he was doing with Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. This is the album and the song that reflects everywhere he had come from and where he was going to go with his career. Vienna is the other deep album cut that does this. Vienna is the one, famously, Joel will often ask his crowds, pretty much every show these days, whether they want to hear the giant smash hit, and basically a standard, Just the Way You Are, or Vienna. And he has said that the crowd almost always picks Vienna. Now, I can't play the music here, or automatically my video would probably get shut down, so there's no music, but go listen to those two songs and tell me which one you like more. If it's Just the Way You Are, more power to you. But for my money, Vienna is one of the great deep album cuts as well, and one of the greatest songs of all time. Even though Just the Way You Are, of course, was again the bigger hit, it won the Grammys for both Record of the Year for the overall recording and production value, and then Song of the Year for the actual composition. So it's a huge, huge, huge song in Billy Joel's career, and I'm sure he would be the first to tell you that. But again, it's the deep album cuts that make the difference on this album. This is where Billy found his voice. Piano Man is an iconic classic. It's his signature song, of course, and it is one of the most important songs ever recorded for what it did. However, especially for his career, however, what he did here was he found his voice, like I'm saying. He found his range. Because on this record, you have the basic rock and roll, you have the New York Italian sound, you have the New York Jewish sound, you have a European sound on a lot of these songs, including Vienna and including Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. You have the ballads, one that's very heartfelt with Just the Way You Are, and one that's a bit cynical and has been accused of being misogynist, which is She Is Always a Woman. You have gospel in the highly underrated classic closing track on the album, which is Everybody Has a Dream. And then you got a lot of stuff that falls somewhere in the middle, including one that has been accused of being anti-religious, which is Only the Good Die Young. And you have The Stranger, of course, the title track. This song has the intro and outro that sets a tone that once again sounds like pure New York City. And it's the Phil Ramone production that puts it a cut above a lot of these intros and outros you've heard on many songs. And especially it was the decision to have Billy Joel's whistle kept intact. He was whistling to show what he wanted it to sound like and what the tune sounded like. Phil Ramone said, well, why don't we just leave it that way? And it wouldn't be The Stranger, the song or the album, if you didn't have Joel's whistle on there. Now, the other huge important aspect beyond Phil Ramone being their producer is the fact that he got to keep his band. I just found this out, so I wanted to make sure I was clear that this is something that I heard recently that blew my mind. Originally, speaking of Sir Paul McCartney and Abbey Road, Billy Joel wanted George Martin, of course, famously the Beatles producer and the one who's got the highest rightful claim to be called the fifth Beatle. He wanted him to produce this record. George Martin turned him down. Primarily, this is the main reason why. This was the information that was news to me. Joel wanted to use his own band, the guys he knew, the guys he had the vibe with, the guys who played well with. And George Martin said, I want to use studio musicians. And Joel said, I've done that on previous records. It sounds too stale. It sounds too commercial. I want to do something that feels organic. I want to play with my guys. Richie Cannata, Hugh McCracken, Liberty DeVito, and then Doug Stegmeyer on bass. And then all kinds of guitarists were doing various things on there, as well as, of course, like I said, the horns and the woodwinds and the accordion, Dominic Cortez, and then backing vocals. But it was the core band that was very important for Joel. He really wanted to make sure, and George Martin turned him down. Phil Ramone said, okay, I'll do it. And George Martin went on a record later on saying, I was wrong. Your band was absolutely wonderful, and they played great on that record. This is a huge part of what makes this record work. If you don't have the rhythm section especially playing what they do, Liberty DeVito on drums and Doug Stegmeyer on the Fender bass, if you don't have them playing the way that they do, and you don't have Richie Cannata playing saxophones, clarinet, flute, tuba, and organ, all kinds of keyboards, just a multi-instrumental master, if you don't have them creating that sound, The Stranger would lose its impact, and it would cease to be the classic that it became. Now, it was a smash hit, of course. Like I said, it won Grammys, of course, for Just the Way You Are. It is sold. It's a diamond record in the United States. It's sold over 10 million records, or copies of records, in other words. And it is sold upwards of 20-something million worldwide. So it's a huge smash hit record. And its impact, once again, on Joel's career can't be overstated. You don't have the Joel that everybody knows without this album. A few of these, a handful, are signature songs, not as much as Piano Man perhaps, but Moving Out, Anthony's song, The Stranger title track, Just the Way You Are, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, Vienna, and Only the Good Die Young, and probably She's Always a Woman. The first 7 tracks are all extremely well-known, well-loved tracks. Get It Right the First Time's probably the weakest song on the album, but still catchy, and then to me, Everybody Has a Dream. It's criminal that one is underplayed. I've even heard people say, well, it loses steam before the last two songs. And I would like to ask those people, when was the last time you listened to Everybody Has a Dream, particularly with a set of headphones on? If not, I encourage you to do it right now. If you've never heard The Stranger, as always, with every record I discuss, I strongly encourage you to listen to it in full, uninterrupted from beginning to end, particularly with headphones on, so you can discover all the things you missed the first time around, hear all the nuances, hear the passion, and then especially hear how tight this band is. From a lyrical standpoint, you can tell, once again, Joel is, he's certainly grasping his New York upbringing and heritage, his son of an immigrant or immigrants heritage. You can hear that all over the record. And for being a Jewish guy from New York, it certainly sounds like an Italian record, not just scenes from an Italian restaurant either. It's got that flavor. It is very, very New York. It is very, very Italian, and it is very, very Jewish all at the same time. But at the same time, it's universal. The themes he discusses, there's alienation, there's fear, there's love, there's joy. There's all the basic themes of what it means to come of age. You know, at this point in his life, this is 1977. He's recording it in summer of 77, and Billy Joel at this point is a 28-year-old guy. And he had experienced just enough life to understand some of the things that he's trying to portray here and successfully doing. I've heard the lyrics get knocked on this record, and I don't quite understand where people are coming from. There's a lot of wit, there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of humor. There are many different elements here lyrically that are part of why people hang on to these songs. Only the Good Die Young is one of the cleverest lyrics ever composed as far as I'm concerned. It's very funny. And if you take it at face value and you're a religious person, you might get offended, but my advice to you is to relax and lighten up, because he's just poking fun at things. I mean, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. He's obviously got his tongue firmly in cheek. And then you think about some of the nuances of his vocal delivery. Billy Joel's never going to get called, an incredible singer, but he's got a style that's all his own, especially when you get to, he's trading in a Chevy for a Cadillac, something that's got a weird, it's almost annoying, but not quite, and it stops just shy of being annoying, but just enough to be very catchy. He's got those things all over the place. And then if you break down the themes of Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, with the high school sweethearts growing up, getting married, and then eventually divorcing, but remaining friends afterward. I'm almost sure, I haven't researched this heavily, I'm almost sure and certain that he was using at least an amalgam of people he knew and coloring those stories in with different pieces of neighborhoods he grew up in and the people that he knew. And, he was born in the Bronx and he grew up in Long Island. You could only imagine the kind of flavor he had seen mixing in between these different groups of people. And so he's filtering that all in through this lens and creating this vision. So it gets categorized as soft rock. I think this is just a rock and roll album that covers the span of what great music is. You can hear Frank Sinatra in there, again, who Phil Ramone produced. You can certainly hear the Beatles influence there, and you can hear classic rock and roll, the early era of rock and roll, Elvis and Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly. You can hear it all. Billy Joel is not a shy guy. He wears his influences and his heart on his sleeve. And some may call some of these tracks sentimental, especially something like Just the Way You Are, but he's just telling it the way he sees it. And this is why he has an enduring legacy. And this record is likely the crown jewel of that legacy. It stands as a wonderful achievement. So go listen to it and tell me what you hear. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you hit the like button and comment if you're a Billy Joel fan or you get turned on to Billy Joel by listening to this record. This is my continuing series of reviewing Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums. This one is ranked at number 70 as of the 2012 rankings, which I believe, again, is the closest thing to a definitive ranking, and it is certainly one of the most enduring records of our time. So please like, comment, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more content like this. If you have ideas about what you think I should review next or what kind of things you'd like to discuss with me, please comment. Please let me know what you think about this record and about Billy Joel. And is this the 70th greatest record ever recorded? Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it all nonsense to rank music in the first place? Or do you feel like I do, that it's just a lot of fun? Either way, I'd love to hear from you and have a discussion. Thanks for waiting on me to get some content out. This week was crazy between work and being sick, and now I'm heading out of town on vacation. So I will drop something maybe later in the week, next week at the very latest. And I appreciate you guys tuning in once again. Take care and have a good one. Thank you.